Welcome back. Another edition of Talking Ball. Today, we're looking at our 5 favorite college players as we're just a couple of weeks from the start of the college season. Got JD. And before we get started, JD, any thoughts, any difficulties trying to figure out your top 5? Where are we at?
There are lots of issues in trying to pick the top five because you wind up having to make decisions about different eras, different rules, shot clock, no shot clock, 24-second, was it in play? Uh,
I got
then
one.
you get then you've got the one and done era versus they played a career. That plays a big role. And then who did they play against? So I have a number of issues here. So this is definitely going to be controversial in terms of 5 favorite players, but that's what makes it fun. And I'd love to, get some comments in the chat from people who disagree and say, but for me, these are the 5 guys that it was must see TV.
Okay. Okay. And yeah, on that note, drop your 5 favorite players in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel, like this video. You can catch us on all of our socials, which is on the page here, or the screen here, I should say. But yeah, let's jump right into it, JD. Who is your fifth favorite
So
player?
at number 5, and we'll of course get to my caveats when we're done to explain some of this, but um, I'm going to just take care of the one and dones at number 5 and say that for me, clearly, uh, in a tie, it would be Kevin Durant, who I wanted to watch every game, but there was only one season. And he is probably the only player to win the Naismith and Wooden Awards for that one year. And Zion Williamson. And I didn't put Cooper Flag there, although I watched every minute of it because there was just something more unusual about watching Zion and watching uh, Kevin Durant. So, you know, if
You
we're
you
going to
went with the
say
tie. You got 5 and 6. Oh,
that they're
skirting the
tied,
rules.
but again, it's another one of those. Kevin Durant played, good 11 years earlier, and different players. So, that's the same thing with Cooper Flag. So I'm not going to make it 3 as far as I'm concerned for the one and done era. But that's my 5th favorite. It's a tie, and I'm already cheating.
Already cheating. Off to a great start. And, surprisingly, those guys are relatively recent, really recent compared to our last video when we did our top 5 favorite teams. And I think your most recent team was the 94 Arkansas Razorback. So I got a feeling we're going to go back as this goes on. For number 5 for me, I went with Buddy Hield. And Buddy Hield was actually Buddy Buckets. Yeah, 4-year career. He spent all 4 years, I believe, with the Oklahoma Sooners. And going back through this, you got to look at you get to look at some stats and like look back at things. He was a Wooden Award winner, Naismith winner, all Big 12 Player of the Year, etc. But the thing that really stood out to me was he had multiple games his senior season of 30 plus points, and he had a huge 46-point performance at Kansas. And the game went to triple overtime. And at the end of the game, the Kansas fans, when he was being interviewed, gave him a standing ovation. That senior season for Buddy Hield was just a lot of fun. He captured the attention of the basketball nation, and certainly one of my favorite players to watch in college basketball.
You make a good case for it, but I don't know that he would have made it. You brought him up. I don't know that I would have ever gotten there for my top 5. But before I go to number 4, I have to explain why Lou Alcindor, eventually Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Bill Walton are not in my top 5. Because if you want to go to any list of the best college basketball players of all time, they're going to be in the top 5. And they're not there for me because while they were, it's hard to say they weren't spectacular, and they each won 3 national championships. But I'm going to say that they didn't have to play night after night against competition that was anywhere near as good as them. And that is, maybe someone in the chat will say that's completely unfair since they were so amazing. Jabbar goes on to have an amazing pro career. Bill Walton, but for injuries, had just an amazing shortened career. Got to come back and play part of the role in the Boston Celtics winning the NBA title, but when he was on the bench. But so they didn't make it. So number 4 for me. And yes, Jack, we're going to start going back in time, is going to be Austin Carr. Notre Dame, 1968, 1971, played for Notre Dame. And he was 6'4". So there's going to be a theme here about who I pick. Not the big guys like Walton and Jabbar or Elvin Hayes or any of the others that get mentioned, but 6'4". He averaged for his 3 seasons 34.6, which is second only to someone else that I'm going to bring up eventually as one of my favorites. Austin Carr holds the single game NCAA tournament record for points in a game. He scored 61 points in the 1970 tournament. He was responsible for breaking UCLA's 88-game win streak. And it's just hard to say that he isn't going to be in my top 5. So Austin Carr gets number 4. Was just incredibly fun to watch.
Okay.
All right, Jack, who's number 4?
For me, this is going to be as far back as I go. The 2001, 2002, whereas his last season in college basketball, I think it was 2002. Jason Williams, as he was known during his time at Duke.
Wow. Buddy Hield, J. Will.
J. Will, yes. And listen, for me, Jason Williams, J. Will, was on the first team I remember watching as a kid. So there's definitely some nostalgia in this for me. But I was going back and watching some highlights. Boy, what could have been if, his career turns out differently in the NBA. But in college, the guy was awesome. He led Duke to the national championship. He averaged 21 points a game his sophomore and junior seasons, over 2 steals, and they were ahead of their time. Like, he was shooting 8 threes a game, connecting around 40% from 3. He was just a really dynamic guard. Playing at the time, you mentioned level of competition. At that time, the ACC had a number of really good programs, and that was the peak, I would say, of the Duke-Maryland rivalry, where he had a few big games against Maryland, and he was just a lot of dynamic guard, could score inside and out, could get plays, steals-wise. Just a lot of fun to watch Jay Williams, as he became known, and now, a big-time college basketball analyst for ESPN.
So let me just go back. I left that one unbelievable stat from Austin Carr. He played in 7 March Madness games, and during those 7 games, he averaged 50 points per game. And I think that is the record, hasn't been broken. 7 games in tournament play to average 50 points a game. All right, number 3 for me, 1972 to 1975. So we're back. We're still back there. And that's going to be David Thompson from NC State, better known as the Skywalker, the originator of the alley-oop, which Monty Tao, who couldn't have been more than 5'5" on NC State, the alley-oop went to a 6'5" player because of his ability to get above the rim. And he played in that period where the Lou Alcindor rule was still in effect of no dunking. And so the alley-oop was nothing more than getting it to him above the rim, of which he then had to lay it in. Now, he did have his revenge over the fact he couldn't dunk in his very last home game at NC State. It was a breakaway, and he had the ball, and he dunked it as hard as he could. Immediate technical foul, but he was great. He won a national championship. He averaged for his career 26.8. They beat UCLA to end UCLA's championship streak in the Final Four. They were 30-1 the year they won the championship, and he was another one like Austin Carr. They were just beautiful to watch. Especially David Thompson because of his shooting ability. But again, Austin Carr 6'4", and maybe David Thompson was 6'5", maybe.
That's what he was listed at, and I went and looked it up because there's not too many times you're going to talk about a basketball player that's 5'5", so I was curious. Monty Toe was listed at 5'7", so I think you're probably right that he really was 5'5". And
so this little guy, they came up, and he's got the credit for the alley-oop.
Wow, that's cool.
In a period in which you couldn't dunk. It was just great. Just so much fun.
Now, you gave a caveat before. I want to give one for myself right now. I can't go back before 2000. Just logistically speaking, I can't say somebody was my favorite player that I wasn't alive to watch. I feel like that's not fair. And so with that being said, the bulk of, or I shouldn't say the bulk, but the majority of the years of me watching college basketball have been in the one-and-done era. And that's important for me to bring up as we get to the third player on my list, which is Greg Oden. who I mentioned in the video we did last week in terms of my favorite teams. I was thinking about putting that Ohio State team on it, but really it was all about Greg Oden for me. He led the Big Ten in field goal percentage, uh, which is obvious. Most of his shots were dunks, but he had a nice hook shot that he had good touch around the rim. He led them in rebounding. He led the conference in rebounding. He led the conference in block shots as well. He was just a presence. He was Shaq 2.0 as far as, well, maybe not 2.0, but the next Shaq. And it didn't work out for him in the pro level, but him and Mike Conley, they got that team all the way to the championship game where they lost to Florida. But that was nothing about Greg Oden, who was the defensive player of the year in the country. It was all Big Ten Rookie of the Year, Big Ten Tournament Most Valuable Player. He got tons of awards that season, ended up being the number one pick. We know what happened after that. Injuries kind of took over from there, but I thought Greg Oden as a college player, I remember being a kid trying to, being a goalie, thinking I was Greg Oden trying to keep things out of the goal. It's unfortunate how it turned out for him, but in college, he was the man. And it seems like a really great guy and just a lot of fun to watch in that 1 year at Ohio State.
Well, all right. So with my second favorite college basketball player, we're going to break the rules here because I didn't watch him play. His career was 1957 to 1960, but I've certainly read about it. And I used to call myself, when I started playing basketball, the little O in fourth grade, because the big O was Oscar Robertson. And his college basketball career, he averaged 33.8 points per game, 15 rebounds, 4.8 assists, two-time National Player of the Year, and he had to do it under the hardest of circumstances, which were the racial issues that were around in 1957 and 1960. He would just come out onto the court and the fans would just start booing, throwing things at him. But Oscar Robertson was just, he went on to have a terrific pro career and was known as the Big O. And one other thing, which I think I mentioned last year in one of our shows, was there's a great sub-story about Hoosiers, because a lot of the movie Hoosiers was fictionalized because the real team that they played against in the finals and was actually a team led by Oscar Robertson. And Oscar, it was tough. It was tough to pick him at number 2, but when I get to number 1, it's clear why number 1 was my favorite. So Oscar Robertson, my number 2 pick.
All right, my number 2. That's a good one, by the way, for somebody. I'm having a hard time believing you didn't watch him in college, but I'll take your word for it.
I'm going to have to tell you, Jack, that for the same reason that you often tell me, in 1957, I was 1 year old. So maybe by 1960, I was on watching with my brother, and I don't remember, but and also in 1960, Jack, and I know it froze again. So in 1960, there was how many games were televised? So Oscar, there just wasn't that many opportunities to watch him. Even at age 4, I probably couldn't have watched him that much. But I've read so much about his career, and I so admire what he did over his high school career, over his college career, and ultimately over his pro career. So Oscar is my number 2 favorite college basketball player.
I guess that's fair. I was 5 or 6 years old watching Jay Williams, so I guess that evens things out. My number 2 is going to be Jimmer Fredette. Jimmer Fredette. Jimmer range. I mean, the hype behind Jimmer Fredette, especially his senior season at BYU, was through the roof. Through the roof. I remember playing in shooting competitions around that time. I was in high school, and if the shot was from the 3-point line, I would take 3 steps back and say Jimmer range and pull up from there, because that's what it felt like. He walked across half court and he was in range. The ball was going up there. He had the ultimate green light at BYU. He was just pulling threes from left, right, center. It just seemed like every shot was going in. And it seemed to just capture the attention of college basketball, especially his senior season. And in that year, Jimmer Fredette he was awesome. Let's look at, he averaged 29 points a game. Guys, 29 points a game, 8.5 threes, which is honestly not as much as I thought it was going to be. And doing my research on this, I went and looked at Steph Curry, to be clear, who's playing, just around the same time. And Steph was around like 10 threes a game. But boy, did Jimmer Fredette have some crazy outbursts that senior season. He had a 47-point game against Utah, and more importantly, in the conference tournament against New Mexico, he scored 52 points. 52 points in a college game, and it wasn't an overtime game. And then the NCAA tournament, he scored 30 points in all 3 games. He was just awesome as a senior, and at that time, you could not have convinced me otherwise that he was not going to be a great NBA player. It didn't work out for him in the NBA, but in college, boy, was he electric.
So these are all picks that and this is definitely a generational thing. Yes. Especially as we go to my number 1 all-time favorite college. Number 1.
I know who it is.
And it's Pete Maravich. Pistol Pete. And yes, I was fortunate. His career was 1967 to 1970. So 11 to 14 years old. So I actually got to watch Pete. You just went into the schoolyard and did whatever you could to imitate him. You would dribble it through your legs. You would, the original no-look pass, other than maybe the Harlem Globetrotters. What he could do with the basketball was often described as there must have been a string attached to it. And from a stats point of view, I love this one. So for his 3 years, and this is the all-time NCAA scoring record, he averaged 44.2 points per game at LSU. He played for Louisiana State for his father, Press Maravich. It was a subsequent coach at LSU, and I don't remember his name, who took the time to chart all of Pete Maravich's shots, because there was no 24-second clock. There was no 3-pointer. So he would have, it's just insane. He would have averaged 57 points a game as his average, with an average of 12 3-pointers a game. No. Completed.
Oh, made 3-pointers.
Made 12. And that makes sense if his average was 57 points a game. Without it, his average was 44 points a game. So, um, and how did he get his nickname of Pistol Pete? His release point often, not always, but often came from his hip. And so, like an old cowboy had his, gun in his holster on his hip. His release point was often because he was so quick with making moves to his left and right, but that he released it, that there was no way to guard him. And it was so ahead of his time to understand, today, Steph Curry, you mentioned, Steph created in order because defenses were bigger now, defenses are quicker now. Steph really is one of the guys that used the step back in order to create space for a shot. Pete Maravich created it by releasing it from his hip. Just, I could go on and on about Pete Maravich.
I would say, I think Steph, I mean, it's not from his hip, but when he is contested, he does have a lower release point
He
than a
does.
typical shooter. Like for many years it was the Splash Brothers, right? And Klay Thompson, the picturesque high release on his shot, but Steph was much lower. Oftentimes, it's the way you describe. I haven't watched Pete Maravich, but the way you described, he's running around. It sounds very similar to Curry. He's running around, lower release point, quick, getting it off. Obviously, no 3-point line for Pistol Pete back then. But yeah, everything, and it's funny to me because you're not the only one who has said, of like parents of my friends who have said, Pete Maravich was their favorite player. So he must have been awesome to watch, live at that time, especially the age where you're talking about 11 to 14 years old. That's the sweet spot, really. And so that must have been a lot of fun.
Just starting to hoop. So, summary, Jack, my 5 are 1, Pete Maravich, 2, Oscar Robertson, 3 is David Thompson, 4, Austin Carr, all guards, may be a little biased there. And then, of course, my 5 are a nod to the one and done era, the tie between Zion and Kevin Durant.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Do you want to know why? Because we're going to end where we started. Because my number 1 player is Zion Williamson. And that's, as you said a few minutes back, that's a generational thing. Because if Zion comes up for 30, 40 years ago, he's playing multiple years in college. But because of the era he comes up in, there's no way he's playing more than 1 year in college. And for him, fortunately so, with how injuries have unfortunately, hurt his ability to stay on the court. But for Zion, I kind of want to go through like the start and the very beginning with him getting to Duke, because there's a ton of hype around Zion at the time, but he was not the number 1 recruit or the number 2 recruit or even number 3 recruit in that class. RJ Barrett was the number 1 guy, and then Cam Reddish was, depending on where you looked, was either ahead of Zion or not. But there was a lot of talk about whether Zion could really do what he was doing against small high schoolers in South Carolina, against legit Division I high-level competition. And so when he announced he was coming to Duke, it was a big surprise because they already had R.J. Barrett and Cam Reddish at the time. And a lot of people thought he was going to go to Clemson, if I remember correctly. So
it was Clemson's to lose because he played for Spartanburg High School in South Carolina.
And so with Zion, there was a lot of skepticism coming into his freshman year. And I remember we went out to Mississauga, just outside of Toronto. Duke they did an exhibition game for RJ Barrett. That was not for Zion, but for RJ being from Mississauga. and we got to see I think RJ played, and definitely Zion. And boy, coming away from that exhibition game, I could not have been higher on Zion with his ability to not just be powerful, but to be like almost so light on his feet, like almost like a ballerina. And that was the scary combination of his explosiveness, but also his balance. And he brought that immediately. The first game of the season for Duke against Kentucky, and they blew him out of the water. And everyone played well, but Zion was awesome, and that was just the start of things to come. And over that season, I was in multiple places. I was in New York, I was in Minnesota, and then I was in San Jose. And by the time I was in California, and working, and a lot of Duke games would be on at 7 o'clock Eastern, I would be racing home from work because I couldn't miss Zion Williamson and the show he was going to put on. Whether that was going to be a crazy dunk, a steal, the block against Virginia, where he comes out of nowhere and erases that shot, that corner three. And obviously, the one that was unfortunate was the game where his shoe blew out against North Carolina. And it just felt like every time Duke played, it was must-watch television because of Zion Williamson. And the last thing I want to say is he did all of this. He was Naismith Award winner. He did, I forgot exactly what you said about Kevin Durant, but he won all those awards. The Wooden Award winner, the Naismith, ACC Player of the Year, Freshman of the Year, etc. But he did all of this on a Duke team that was not set up for him to really have this level of success. And the stat I have to support that, Duke shot 30 or 31%, if you want to be generous, from three that year, which was in the bottom 40 teams in the nation. That's 360 teams. That's Duke basketball, notoriously a good three-point shooting team. And so Zion did all of that with very little spacing. What could have been if he was on a team with even better three-point shooting. And just a treat to get to watch for 30-some-odd games. Even I wish it would have been more.
So, the game in which he blows out his sneaker against UNC, how much was Zion Williamson must-see TV? Who was sitting courtside to watch the game? The President of the United States, Obama. I mean, I don't recall another president sitting in the front row for a college basketball game.
No.
And Zion did things. He was number 5 on my list solely because of the one and done issue and my interpretation of it. Did I get to watch him over a period of time, or did I only get one? But I don't know how many times we said to each other, did he just do that? And you'd have to watch it on the replay to go, my goodness. And you know that my favorite was when he ran across the court and he got at the apex of the shot, the three-pointer that was being released. And we watched that replay 6, 7, 8 times to truly appreciate what he did with his size and ability to run, and then his jumping ability, just extraordinary.
Yeah, and the thing with Zion was it wasn't just that. He would do other things like in the game, which is his skill level. Like one play that's maybe a little bit more under the radar is in that Kentucky game, that first game of the season. He got a steal, and Trey Jones was leaking ahead, and he threw this like 3/4 court, 2/3 of the court bounce pass that hit him right on in stride, and then Trey Jones just laid it in. And it was just like he could 360 dunk effortlessly. He could pin your shot against the backboard, and he could do that. So it was just a real treat to watch Zion. To recap my list, I had at number 5, Buddy Hield. Number 4, Jay Williams. Number 3, Greg Oden. Number 2, Jimmer Fredette. And number 1, Zion Williamson. But to your point, I didn't have as many guys to pick from that stayed in college Like your guys who were awesome and stayed multiple years. There were just far fewer. If you were good after a year or two, you were not sticking around. And the guys who, like, even the guys on my list who did stick around multiple years, especially the seniors in Jimmer and Buddy, it took them their first 2 years to really establish themselves as really good college players. So it was, I definitely am missing. There's definitely guys you could have picked from who maybe stayed longer in the past 25 years, but those are the guys who I wanted to go with for today.
We didn't have Magic and Larry, who it was a very interesting thing that was Magic and Larry, as good as they were. It really was their championship game in the NCAA tournament that was their coming out party. And then at that point, if you hadn't been following their high school and college ascendancy, you saw it that night, and there was so much hype for that game. So they didn't get it to my list. And Kareem, Lou Alcindor, and
Honorable
and
mentions. We're gonna do some honorable mentions here. I feel like you've
well,
done 4 or 5.
yeah, I have at least. I do have one other truly honorable mention, but go ahead.
Okay. For me, like I was just mentioning, guys who may have stuck around longer in the past 25 years. I guess quick caveat: you mentioned Cooper Flag at the top. I refrained from picking anybody from like the last 2 years or so, just because I felt like it was a little too recent. I wanted to give it time to kind of marinate, see if I still felt the same way, recency bias, all that. For that reason, partially, like a guy like Zach Edey, who's not necessarily like my favorite player to watch, but was one of the best players of college basketball in the past 20, 25
Well,
years.
and if you go to Zach Edey, it's hard not to go, for me, to go back to Tim Duncan.
That's a great one. That's a great one, certainly.
With just incredible efficiency night after night after night, guaranteed to do it. But I do think that there's two others that I do need to mention. The much hated Christian Laettner. 4 years, 4 out of 4 years, Duke is in the Final Four. 2 of those years, they win the championship. It's pretty hard not to mention him in an era in which there was significant competition. And clearly, that's why, that's my bias against Bill Walton and Lou Alcindor. But if you really want to talk about someone who changed the game, Caitlin Clark.
Yeah, that's a fair one. That's a very
talk about must-see TV.
I mean, she changed women's college basketball. Or maybe change isn't the right word. Maybe the right word would be accelerated, like greatly accelerated the curve for women's college basketball. And what she's done in the WNBA completely changed the league to the point where the commissioner and the head of the Player Association are getting into a verbal feud in public because they feel like Caitlin Clark and a couple other players, in her, like Angel Reese and Paige Buchers, aren't being compensated for what they are. But yeah, I mean, what was it, like double digit 10, 12 million people were watching her NCAA tournament games. It's a great shout. And she's great. Like, she was a great player in college basketball. I mean, that's a weird way to put it because she's still a great player. But I'm trying to say,
but we're talking about college basketball players,
and a lot of fun to watch. The only time I know where a women's college game was on, and it wasn't to support, the UConn women, where I would go, I want to put that one on. I want to see what Caitlin Clark's going to do because she could really shoot that thing, and then she could pass. Like, she was a really well-rounded player. It's a good call.
Well, those are my favorites and your favorites. Love to hear from you why you disagree with us, why you agree with us. Put it in the chat. So as Jack said at the beginning of the show, please subscribe to us. Please like this show. And look forward to doing it again with you, Jack.
Until next time, guys, peace.